In our lesson today, we're going to have an introduction to circles and the different parts of circles, and that's going to lead us to our overall goal for today is learning how to calculate the circumference of a circle. Before we talk about circumference, though, let's talk about what a circle is. A circle is a closed figure with all of its points in equal distance from its center. Okay, so you can imagine where the center of the circle is. Every single part that makes up the circle right here is the same distance away from the center of that circle. Now, there are a couple of different segments of circles that we need to know about. The first is going to be called a radius. A radius is any segment connecting the center to a point on the circle. Okay, and so we're going to draw a radius in our circle that we see here. So we imagine the center would be about here. And then I can draw a line segment in any direction. I decided to go over there, but I could have drawn it straight up, straight down, to the left, anywhere from the center. If I drew a line segment, this is what a radius looks like. And I'm going to abbreviate it R for radius. Another segment about circles that's important to know is called a diameter. A diameter is any segment that passes through the center and has both of its endpoints on the circle. Okay, so the radius starts at the center and lands on the circle. A diameter, though, is going to have both of its endpoints on the circle and it needs to go through the center. So we can draw a diameter, maybe something that looks like that. Okay, and this segment right here is the diameter. And again, we can think about that as the letter D, D for diameter. Okay, so a radius, again, starts at the center and lands on the circle. The diameter starts and ends on the circle, and it passes through the middle. Explain the relationship between the radius and the diameter of a circle. Okay, so if I were to compare the radius to the diameter, the radius is half the diameter. Okay, since the radius goes from the center to a point on the circle, that would be half the amount of the diameter. So R is equal to the diameter divided by 2. Okay, vice versa, the diameter, there we go, is twice the radius. Okay, the length of the diameter is 2 times the length of the radius. So D, the diameter, is equal to 2 times R. So these are two very important formulas to know that relate the radius and the diameter. Radius is diameter divided by 2, half the diameter. Diameter equals 2 times the radius. In the chart, we're going to fill in the missing values of the radius and the diameter. If I know either the radius or the diameter, I'm going to figure out the other part that is missing. Okay, remember that the radius is half of the diameter, and the diameter is 2 times the radius. And so in our first example, they've told us here that the radius is equal to 12. We have to figure out what the diameter is. Well, remember right here, we said that the diameter is 2 times the radius. So we're going to take the value of the radius and multiply it by 2. When we do that, 12 times 2 equals 24. So if the radius is 12, the diameter would have to be 24. If the radius is 7.5, again, we're going to take that value and we're going to multiply it by 2. 7.5 times 2 equals 15. So the radius is 7.5, the diameter is 15. If the radius is 36, again, just multiply the radius by 2. 36 times 2 is 72. So when the radius is 36, the diameter equals 72. In the next 3 spots, though, they tell us the value of the diameter. We have to figure out how much the radius is going to be. Remember, the radius, to do that measurement, you take the diameter and you divide it by 2. So if the diameter is 50, I'm going to divide that number by 2 to get the radius. 50 divided by 2 means that the radius would have to be 25. If the diameter is 76, again, just take that number and divide it by 2. 76 divided by 2 is equal to 38 for the radius. And if the diameter is 91, to get the radius, take 91 and divide it by 2. 91 divided by 2 means that the radius would have to be 45 and 5/10. Our objective for today's lesson is to be able to calculate the circumference of a circle. So now we need to discuss what circumference is. Circumference is the distance around a circle. Okay, circumference is the distance around a circle. And so if I take a look at my circle again, if I want to go around this circle, I'm calculating the circumference. Okay, so I'm going to label that here, the circumference. Again, that's the distance all the way around the circle. Okay, and that's what we're going to be practicing today, finding the circumference of a circle. Now, in order to help us calculate the circumference, there's a very important number in math that we have to familiarize ourselves with, and that would be the number called pi. If you measure around a circle, so the circumference, and you divide it by the diameter of the circle, you will always come close to the approximate value of pi, okay? Pi, in order to calculate that, you take the circumference and you divide it by the diameter of the circle, okay? On your scientific calculator, you should have a button that looks like that, and if you push that, that number is what the approximate value of pi is. So if you punch that onto your calculator, pi is approximately 3.141592654. Okay? Pi is a number that goes on forever and doesn't repeat. We call that an irrational number. Okay? These are the digits of pi that we are going to use. That's the full calculator display. And again, that's going to be a very important number for us to know when we're working with circumference. Okay? So, in order to calculate the circumference, there are actually two different formulas that we are going to need to know. Remember that the circumference divided by the diameter is equal to pi, okay? So if I know the diameter of the circle and I want to figure out what the circumference is, all I would have to do is take that number pi and multiply it by the diameter, okay? One of your circumference formulas is C equals pi d. Circumference equals pi times the diameter. Now, if instead they gave you the radius of the circle, there's a different formula that we would have to use. Now remember that the diameter is 2 times the radius, okay? So if instead of knowing the diameter, all right, if they gave me the radius, I'm going to have to replace d with 2r because the diameter is the same as 2 times the radius. So if they give us the radius of the circle, this equation now is going to change to C equals 2 times pi times r. And again, that 2r is the same as that diameter right there. So put it like a little star next to each one of these formulas. If you know the diameter, use C equals pi d. If you know the radius of the circle and you want to know the circumference, use C equals 2 pi r. In example 1, they tell us that Bethany wanted to make a straight pathway through the center of her circular garden. She knows that the circumference of the garden is 15 pi feet. What is the length of the pathway? Okay, so again, we need to draw a line that represents her pathway, and it goes straight through the center of her circular garden. Okay, so we're going to have something that looks like that. If we were to imagine her circular garden, we're making a straight pathway through the center. And if we remind ourselves what that segment is, it starts and ends on the circle and it goes through the center. That is the diameter, okay? So we are trying to figure out the length of the diameter in this example. And they told us that the circumference of the garden is 15 pi feet. All right, so for the equation, would we use C equals 2 pi r? Or will we use C equals pi d? Well, since we're talking about the diameter, we're going to use this equation right here, c equals pi d. So let's go ahead and write that equation, c equals pi d. And they tell us again that the circumference of the garden is 15 pi feet. That means we're going to substitute 15 pi in for the circumference. So the circumference becomes 15 pi, and that equals pi times d. We have to figure out the value of d, the diameter. This is just like solving a one-step equation. The diameter d is on the right-hand side of the equal sign. Okay, d is being multiplied by this number pi. So in order to get d all by itself, we're going to have to divide by pi on the right. And if we do that on the right, we have to do the same thing on the left-hand side. Okay, now remember, it's important to remember that pi is a number. Any number divided by itself is equal to 1. So this is 1 times d, which is just d, the diameter. D is all alone, and that's exactly what we wanted to happen. So now let's calculate on the left-hand side what the value of the diameter is. Again, pi is a number. Any number divided by itself is equal to 1. So this is 15 times 1, which is just 15. And so we can say that the pathway is 15, and then we need the units, they said right here, feet. 15 feet long. The pathway is 15 feet long. In the second example, they say that the circumference of a circle is 8 pi inches. What is the radius in inches of the circle? Okay, so we're looking for the radius. Remember that the radius is from the center to any point on the circle. So we can label that as r. That's what we're looking for. What is the radius of this circle? They gave us the circumference, which was 8 pi inches, and we're looking for the radius. So for our equation, we need the one that has circumference and radius in it, which is this first one. We're going to use c equals 2 pi r to figure out the value of the radius. Okay, so again, since they gave us the circumference as 8 pi inches, I'm going to substitute that value in for c. 8 pi equals 2 pi r. Now, just like before, our goal is to try to get this time r all by itself. R is on the right-hand side of the equation. It's being multiplied by 2 and by pi. We have to get r all alone. So I want to start then by dividing each side by pi. Okay? Once again, remember that pi is a number. Pi divided by itself is 1. Pi divided by itself is 1. That means on the left-hand side, we just have 8. And on the right-hand side, we have 2 times r. Okay? Now, r isn't alone yet. We're close. But again, r is being multiplied by 2. That means to get r alone, we're going to have to divide by 2 on each side. When we do that this time, all right, on the right, 2 divided by 2 is 1, leaving us with r. 8 divided by 2 equals 4. Okay, so the value of r is 4, which means that the radius is 4 and the units are inches. The radius is 4 inches. In our previous 2 examples, we knew the circumference. In our next examples, we're going to be calculating what the circumference is. There are 2 ways that you can show circumference, okay? One is by hitting the pi key and then rounding to the given place value, so we'll definitely need our calculators here. The other one is if we leave our answer in terms of pi, meaning that pi will be a part of the answer, okay? And we're going to show examples of both of those. Let's start with example 3a. It says you would like to add fringe around a circular rug. It's 8 feet in diameter. How much fringe do you need to buy? Round your answer to the nearest whole number. So here's our circular rug. We're going to put fringe all the way around it. So the fringe is going to go all the way around this circle. Okay, so the fringe is going to represent the circumference of the circle. They tell us that the rug is 8 feet in diameter. Remember that the diameter starts and ends on the circle and goes through the center. This is 8 feet, that length right there. Okay? In order to figure out how much fringe that we need to use, we're going to use the formula that has circumference and diameter in it, which is this equation right here. So we'll start by writing C equals pi d. Okay? In this example, we're trying to figure out how much fringe to buy, which is represented by the circumference since the fringe goes around the circle. They told us this time how much the diameter is. The diameter we can see is 8 feet. So I'm going to replace D with 8. C equals pi times 8. Since C is all by itself, all we have to do is multiply pi times 8 in order to get our answer. So let's go ahead and get our calculator. So we're going to use our calculator now. We're going to punch in 8 times pi, and our pi key is right there. Okay, and we're going to hit enter. And there is the number that we're going to write down. Make sure that you write down all of those digits on your paper. Now that we've got the value of C, okay, now we can go ahead and round our number. They told us to round our answer to the nearest whole number. So right now it looks like it's 25 as a whole number. We check the 10th place right there, and that is not enough to round us up. So we're going to say that this is approximately 25. This means that you need about 25 feet of fringe. Okay, the units were in feet. You need about 25 feet of fringe. Our follow-up question 3B says, how much will the fringe cost if it's $2.88 per foot? Well, we just found out that we needed 25 feet of fringe. Every foot is $2.88. So we're going to take 25 and multiply it by $2.88. And when we do that, punch it into your calculator, you should get a value of 72. And so we can say that the fringe will cost $72. In example 4, they say that you need to build a new corral for a horse to train in. The diameter of this round corral is 40 feet. How much linear fencing will you need? We're going to round our answer again to the nearest whole number. Okay, so we're creating a round corral for a horse to train in. We have to buy fencing, and again, the fence is going to go around this circle so that the horse can't get out. Okay, we don't know how much fencing we need, but we do know that the diameter of the corral, the diameter is 40 feet. So again, we can draw in a diameter and label it as 40 feet. In order to figure out the amount of fencing to go around it, the circumference, we're again going to use C equals pi d because we know the diameter. So let's start there. C equals pi d. The diameter of this circle is 40 feet. So we're going to replace d with 40. C equals pi times 40. And again, C is already by itself, so all we need to do is multiply pi times 40. So again, let's go back to our calculator. Okay, so again, we're going to do pi times 40. So I'm going to hit in 40 times pi. There's my pi key, hit enter. And again, I'm going to write out all of those digits when I record this in my notes. Now that I have my value of the circumference, I'm ready to round. And once again, round to the nearest whole number. Okay, so again, it looks like 125. We look at the 10th place and we see a 6, which is enough to round us up. So we're going to say that this is approximately 126, which means that you need about 126 feet of fencing in order to make our corral. In example 5, we're told that the radius of a circular rug is 8 feet. What is the circumference? Round your answer to the nearest hundredth. Okay, so they told us the radius was 8 feet. So let's draw that in. Remember, the radius starts at the center and lands on the circle. That distance there is 8 feet. They want to know what is the circumference, so the distance around that circular rug. Since we're looking for circumference and they gave us the radius, we're going to use c equals 2 pi r. So let's go ahead and write that down, c equals 2 pi r. They told us in our example here that the radius of the circle is 8 feet. So I'm going to replace r with 8. C equals 2 pi times 8. Okay, and now, again, c is already by itself, so now I'm just going to go ahead and multiply. So I'm going to punch in my calculator, 2 times pi times 8. So let's go to our calculator. Okay, so we're going to punch in 2 times pi times 8. 2 times pi times 8. And again, we're going to write down all of those digits for our circumference. Now that we have the value of the circumference, we can go ahead and round. And they told us to round to the nearest hundredth this time. So right now it looks like 50 and 26 hundredths. We look in the thousandths place and we see that there's a 5 there, which is enough to round us up. So the circumference is going to be approximately 50 and 27 hundredths. And we can write the circumference is about 50 and 27 hundredths, and the units are feet. In the next example, they tell us that the circumference of a DVD is 28 and 2744 centimeters. Find the radius. So again, we draw on a radius. R is what we're calculating. They gave us the circumference. We're looking for the radius. So again, we're going to use c equals 2 pi r. So let's write that down. C equals 2 pi r. They told us that the circumference is 28 and 2744 centimeters. So let's replace c with that number. 28 and 2744 equals 2 pi r. And once again, our goal is to try to get r all by itself. R is on the right. It's being multiplied by 2 and by pi. Let's start by dividing by 2 first. Okay. On the right, 2 divided by 2 is 1, leaving us with pi times r. If we take 28 and 2744 and divide that by 2, punch that into your calculator, you're going to end up with 14 and 1372. Okay. But r is still not by itself on the right-hand side. It's being multiplied by pi. So let's go ahead and divide by pi on both sides. Okay. On the right, pi divided by itself is 1, leaving us with r. And now we're going to go to our calculator. We're going to type in 14 and 1372 divided by pi. Okay, so we have 14 and 1372. We're going to divide by pi equals, all right, and again, we're going to write down these digits for the value of r. Now that we have the value of r, we're going to round our answer to the nearest tenth. So it looks like 4 and 5 tenths. We check out the hundredths place and we see a 0, which is not enough to round us up. So r is approximately 4 and 5 tenths, which means that the radius is about 4.5, and the units in this case were centimeters. The radius is about 4.5 centimeters. In our last example, they say that the radius of a circle is 4 inches. What is the circumference of the circle? Okay, so we're looking for the circumference. They've given us the radius. The equation that has radius and circumference in it is going to be c equals 2 pi r. So this is the equation that we are going to use. And since they've given us the radius as 4 inches, we're going to replace r with 4 inches. C equals 2 pi times 4. Okay. Now, c is all by itself, and normally we would go ahead and we would multiply 2 times pi times 4 with our calculator. But pay attention to the answers here. This is a multiple choice question. Notice that pi is in every single one of the answers. All of these answers, therefore, are called in terms of pi. That means I'm going to multiply the numbers together except for pi. So in this example, c equals, I'm just going to multiply 2 times 4, which I know is 8, and then I keep pi. C equals 8 pi. 2 times pi times 4 is the same as 8 pi, which means that our answer here for the circumference of the circle, the circumference, is going to be 8 pi inches. So if they say that they want their answer in terms of pi, do not multiply by pi, keep pi as part of the final answer.